Why do we give people air when they
He's
have...
the LNT chairman. He's not like
So
a
what?
consequential person.
It doesn't mean that not everybody in high positions has enlightened views about the world that you need to listen to. I think the environment in every country is being poisoned by a kind of ethno-nationalism. And unfortunately, across the world, democracy is being threatened. It's certainly something that we should pay attention to in India. What I see is the data being sort of kept inside. The sooner it gets out, what were the electoral rolls in each? What was the booth-by-booth election outcomes? The better it will be for us to establish that the elections were in fact transparent and well conducted. 6% doesn't cut it for us. For all those who talk about Viksit Bharat in 2047, you have to ask what is happening today. We're not growing fast enough.
Raghuram Rajan, thank you so much for your time. A pleasure talking to you. Let's start with something that's an immediate headline and immediate talking point, which is, of course, the fact that the rupee has breached the 86 mark. It's fallen to a historic low on Monday. How do you see this development? How concerned are you?
Well, first, thanks for having me. The fixation, of course, always is with the rupee-dollar exchange rate. And the reality is the dollar has been strengthening against many currencies. If you look at the euro, the dollar was at, it could buy 91 cents on the euro at the beginning of last year. And now it buys 98. So there's been about a 6 or 7% depreciation in the euro. That's about what has happened to the rupee, right? From about 83 to 86 and change, maybe even a little less than what has happened to the euro. So it's really a dollar issue. The dollar is strengthening partly because of the thought that the new administration would apply tariffs. The deficit may go down. The trade deficit for the US, that will strengthen the dollar. There's also some potential safe haven buying at this point into dollar assets. So given all that, I wouldn't be overly worried. If you look at the real effective exchange rate of the rupee, that is its exchange rate against all countries and correcting for inflation, it's actually not depreciated that much, and maybe some additional sort of nominal depreciation might be useful for Indian exports.
So you would not be overly concerned at this time, and you would not be looking towards the central bank, towards the RBI to be making any immediate necessary interventions?
I don't think you want to intervene ever against necessary adjustments that are taking place because of fundamental economics. And the RBI has always said that. I think what you want to intervene against are, is volatility, which is short-term, is going to go away. My sense is dollar appreciation is something that will play out for some time until we see the new administration's policies. So in that sense, I'm not overly worried with what is happening. The other big issue is if, in fact, there are tariffs being raised all over the place, the natural way to combat that is through some depreciation of your currency so that you offset some of the tariffs being applied to your exports.
But let's, if you will, talk a little bit about some of the analysis as to why the rupee is here. In a way, you suggest that this is a corrective process that is underway for the rupee to reach a more natural level. But there has been some analysis by other pundits talking about the increase in crude oil prices, also talking about the outflow of foreign investors. We have seen more than 22,000 crore rupees of foreign investment leave the markets in January alone. Does this cause you concern? Is this really the rupee settling at a more natural level, or is there something else going on here?
Well, I think we should be a little careful when these flows come in and they go out to and understand them a little better, right? they have been coming in for quite some time in the past. And some of that was, flows going out of China and readjusting by finding other emerging markets to go into. And India looked reasonably strong in terms of growth and stable politically, and therefore flows came seeking assets in India. Now, with there's been a little bit of adjustment, not most recently, but over the last year, in that Chinese assets have become a little more attractive as the Chinese government is talking about stimulus and so on. Now that hasn't played out fully, and we haven't seen stimulus to the extent that people anticipated, perhaps because the Chinese are waiting for the U.S. administration to make its moves. But nevertheless, that has led to some rebalancing in global portfolios towards more holding a little more China. So my sense is these are all natural adjustments. There's nothing in the immediate to panic about. That said, I think two factors are playing out. One is the fact that Indian growth has been slowing a bit, and we can obviously talk about the underpinnings of that. And the second, I think, factor is that I think at this point, all emerging markets are, given that there is going to be disruption, there is a little bit of a risk-off trade also, a little bit, not huge, but that's and that would apply to a variety of emerging markets.
And we'll, of course, come to sort of the currents of uncertainty swimming through the world order at this point in a moment. But since you talk about sort of at least a slight slowdown in growth, the IMF has spoken about the Indian economy looking slightly weaker, quote unquote, for 2025. Do you sort of agree with that forecast? And how do you look back at the last couple of years? Because something very interesting has happened with the GDP figures at a time when you remember you yourself were very pessimistic. The economy did much better than expected. But through 2024, the numbers have been lower than what most people would have hoped for. With the IMF figures coming in at a slightly weaker forecast for India, how do you see the GDP story?
Well, the underlying facts haven't changed. Remember, one of the reasons I was a little worried is that consumption demand in India was not picking up strongly, except at the upper end. The lower middle class was hurting because of lack of jobs. And what we've seen more recently is the lower end has come up a little bit, but the upper end has slowed down a little bit. So to some extent, I think the problem is still the same. Now, why was that papered over earlier? I think it was papered over to some extent by, pandemic recovery. So we had these tremendous numbers, but it was partly also a huge government push towards infrastructure investment. So that helped some of our big industries. That helped also because there was also underlying demand from the well-off pandemic savings, etc. Now we've sort of come to the end of all that adjustment, and so what we are moving towards is more what our steady-state level of growth is, and that is more in the 6% range, which is what people think will happen for this year. Again, it's not something new. It's something we've been drifting towards, but it is something to worry about because 6% doesn't cut it for us. We need much faster rates of growth. If we settle down to 6% at a point when so many young people are joining the labor force and we should be getting the benefits of the population dividend, much more employment, well, that's not happening. And one aspect of that is private investment. Private investment is really tepid. The big firms aren't investing. Yeah, they're making noises. They keep making noises. We will invest. But you're not seeing the numbers on the ground in terms of a whole lot of investment projects being carried out. The government slowed down in its infrastructure investment because of the elections and so on, and it hasn't picked up to the extent it needs to pick up so far. That's good for the deficit, but it's not great for growth. And so I think the bottom line is that we need the private sector to pick up. It can't be all government doing the infrastructure. That's not going to be enough. And what it takes to get that private sector growth up is really the big question.
When you say 6% doesn't cut it for us, 6% isn't good enough, what is your benchmark? Because the argument will still be made by those who have a more rosy picture of the economy that this is still better than most economies in the world. This still makes India on track to be one of the fastest growing economies in the world. When you say 6% doesn't cut it, what concerns you the most?
Well, I mean, the issue is not to pat ourselves on the back because we're doing better than rich countries. Rich countries grow more slowly. They're already there. They're at the frontier. This is natural economics. What you want to compare yourself with is other developing countries at your stage of per capita level of GDP. So take China, early 2000s. It was growing at double digits. Helter-skelter growth there. Take Korea, similar stage, growing at double digits. The reason they were growing is because they were also at that point, certainly Korea, getting their population dividend. A lot of young people joining the labor force and increasing growth rates. Now we are in the worrisome situation of receiving our population dividend, our dependency ratios, or the number of old people and babies depending on the rest to produce is coming down. But we're not providing jobs for those people joining the labor force to the extent that they need. And so at this point, we're still chugging along at the growth rate we've been chugging along. Commendable, no doubt, for the last 25 years. But this is when we should be accelerating. This is when China accelerated, but we're not. And for all those who talk about Viksit Bharat in 2047, you have to ask what is happening today. We're not growing fast enough.
What would be the sweet spot in terms of a GDP figure that would make you happy?
I mean, certainly more. But let's say, at least 2 percentage points more to account for the dividend that we're getting and to ensure that these people are reasonably well employed. But of course, one would take anything much higher than that. I think, there comes a time when people are really confident about the country and think the possibilities are limitless. We seem to have that kind of self-belief in the public discourse, but it doesn't match the underlying growth numbers. And that's why it's a mistake to keep comparing with Germany and Japan and saying we'll overtake them. That's natural. Those guys aren't growing at all, 0.5%, 1%. What we need to compare ourselves with is other countries that were in our situation. And there's not one country in the G20 which is at our level of per capita GDP. We're the lowest. We're the poorest. We should be growing faster than everyone else.
What's holding us back? If you were to sort of be prescriptive about it, obviously you've said this before, and it's a kind of axiomatic, fact that jobs is key, employment is key. But inflation has been a kind of quizzical question, because if you look at retail inflation, even at the time that we were talking, it's down to a 4-month low. Yet if you talk to most people, they'll say "Sab kuch bahut mehenga hai." It's very difficult to make ends meet. People have jobs, but not necessarily the jobs they want. Right? We keep reading about those with degrees who are, delivery personnel, for example, for quick commerce, not to take away the dignity of that, but they may have wanted to do more with their degrees. What then is holding us back from growing faster, according to you?
Well, I think first the world is changing, so that is part of the problem. Across the world, countries are battling with the problem that automation is making jobs, whether in services or in industry, harder. So, I mean, if you go to a cell phone factory in India, We have a bunch of really top-class assemblers, but they're not employing so many people. I had this image that people would sit in a row soldering components onto a motherboard. No, that's gone. The kind of micro soldering you need to do is just beyond people. It's done by machines. So you have a row of machines imported from Japan doing the kind of soldering that needs to be done. And what the worker is doing is either they're really skilled workers sort of managing the machines and repairing them when they go off track, or they're very few unskilled moving parts from machine to machine, and they will soon be replaced by robots. This is true even in India, where labor is cheap. It is much more true in the rest of the world. But the point, however, is to be competitive in manufacturing. You're really becoming much more labor intensive, capital intensive. And you can see even in India, if you look at the IIP, where is it growing? The India's index of industrial production, it's in the much more capital-intensive portion. This is not to say that we're not creating some jobs. I mean, leather, for example, new factories starting up in Tamil Nadu, but they're all looking for better skilled workers and more disciplined workers than they find broadly available. And so. What is happening is those kinds of jobs, the idea that manufacturing exports are going to be India's salvation, I think we're living in the last part of the 20th century, not in the 21st century. And that, to my mind, is a fundamental error we risk making, thinking that this is going to be where the jobs happen. Where we will create industries, but those are going to be capital-intensive industries. I mean, think about the amounts we're pouring into trying to get chips in, 25 billion in subsidies. And the notion is this is not going to create jobs. So what is? Well, we need an export sector which is globally competitive. We have one, which is the high-skilled services exports. These global capability centers, IT in the past, consulting now increasingly. So that's going to create skilled jobs. We need to train people really well for that. High quality IIMs, IITs, and so on. But for the lower end jobs, where the mass of our people are, we need to think about what will be the source of employment. And almost surely the answer is it has to come on the backs of better skilling. We need better carpenters, better technicians, better cameramen, better, there's a whole scope of capabilities which can actually find good jobs in a growing urbanizing India. And it can be based on domestic demand. Few countries have had the kind of size of domestic demand that we have. But we need to exploit that. And that has to be, let's not talk about chip factories. At the higher end, let's talk about chip designers. That is more IIT engineers with chip design capabilities. But at the lower end, think about more plumbers, more carpenters who actually know their jobs and can generate decent incomes in a growing urbanizing India. It also means, new industries like green. It also means more, labor-intensive industries like tourism. So the worry I have is we're overly fixated on the shiny manufacturing stuff. And that'll play a role, but it's not going to create the jobs we need. We need to be much more sensible about jobs. I like the fact that the government last year talked about skilling in the budget. But what has happened there? How much have we done? Has it made a dent? We need far more transparency about what the government is doing and what its effects are, and not just press information bureau sort of advertisements extolling the virtues of the government, or full page ads from the government, with absolutely no ability to go behind the data and see what's actually happening.
Well, talking about Press Information Bureau releases, there's been a huge amount of debate and some mirth over GST rates. I'm sure you've seen some of the memes, salted popcorn versus caramel popcorn. It's all good for a few laughs, but more seriously, the general sense now is that the GST, which was meant to simplify the tax structure, has become one giant muddle. It's actually complicated things instead of simplifying them. How do you look at the debate? And dare I ask you how much you think caramel popcorn should be taxed?
Well, first, I have no view on the last part of the question. Second, I think you want to see this more generally, right? That we do tend to complicate things a lot with nudges, fixes, constant tinkering, et cetera, et cetera. I think it is a fair amount of time since we brought GST in. I think it's reasonable to actually do a careful study by an expert committee to see what's going right, what's going wrong, and then propose, a pretty well thought out set of changes. I think it has to take the states into confidence. It has to also, I think, work for the center. But this is one of those places where, we shouldn't constantly keep fidgeting and tinkering and moving things. And it keeps everybody confused and becomes a right royal mess because everybody has their little Band-Aid on their little problem. Instead, let's do one careful analysis of what has happened, what the experience has been, and then propose something and then fix that. And don't keep tinkering with that also. The bureaucracy loves complication because it gives it a raison d'etre. It makes its functioning so much more interesting. That's not to say there aren't great bureaucrats there, but I think we should not give in to the tendency which we inherited from the British of just complicating things too much so the bureaucrats can have power.
Before we get to the world situation, you spoke about bureaucracy. Let's also talk about corporate honchos. One of the raging debates and a generational clash, as it were, between young people and promoters of companies, promoters of giant companies, is work-life balance. You've seen the L&T chairman. I won't ask you about, which day of the week anyone should be staring at their wife or staring at their husband. The assumption in that comment was that men work and women stay at home. But the more serious debate that the L&T chairman's comments threw up about a 90-hour week while he earns or takes home 51 crores of a package every year is what's going on. What is the quality of jobs? What is the quality of employment that we're offering our young people? And while the generational clash will go on, it goes on even in my own team. How do you look at this debate over 90-hour work week, Murthy saying 70-hour work week? I mean, can you put a number on what's an appropriate work week?
I think you can't, and I think that's where you heading. I mean, clearly, if you're working on the shop floor in the middle of deafening noise and hot, unpleasant circumstances, there is a different work week than if you're reading interesting papers and books and you love doing research. And you can spend all the time you have doing that, which is sort of my job. So I think it's very hard to prescribe. It depends on how much you're enthused by the work that you're doing, how much you find the work meaningful in making change. And so I don't think there's one size for all. And I do think everyone finds their balance. I do think, if you go back to ancient Greece, the old people are constantly complaining about the young people and how they don't seem to work and they have all these crazy interests. This seems like just a regurgitation of the constant complaint older generations have about younger generations. And I mean, I now am well and truly in the older generation, and I remember that we were somewhat frivolous, by our current standards when we were young, and we did crazy things. Of course, I presume we'd be shocked by some of the things the young people do today. But I don't think that's any reason to keep lecturing them. People have to find balance, and if they're not working to the extent that you want them to work in your firm, look to yourself. What is it that you're doing wrong in incentivizing them? And to some extent, I think you have to also allow for the fact that people have other interests in life than just your job, and they have to develop them. So I think this gets a lot of air when it shouldn't. It's old people complaining, and they do
But it's
that.
also the kind of comments, right? Like how long can you stare at your wife? I mean, it's frankly not even funny. Like, I know
I
that
mean,
millions of
why do we give people air when they
he's the
have?
L&T chairman. He's not like
So
an
what?
inconsequential person.
It doesn't mean that not everybody in high positions has enlightened views about the world that you need to listen to. The fact that you have a bunch of skills which get you to the right place doesn't necessarily mean, and I that applies to me also. I have no great views on GST because I haven't gone into the micro details of it. I just know the broader issues that we need to revisit it. But doesn't give me a license to opine on everything.
Yeah.
Though you're asking me to.
I can ask you how many hours you work a week.
Well, I don't see that goes back to the point. I don't see it as work. I actually enjoy doing it. And so a lot of it, I mean, what is the kind of work that I really, really, dislike? It's very small. A lot of the work I do is either writing, speaking, or reading, all of which sort of I like. And so it's sort of, and this is my issue with my wife, because when I spend time on this, I say I'm working, and she said, "No, you're you're playing. Here's the work that you need to do." So there is a debate on that.
Yeah. In fact, my friend, the economist Rohini Pandey, whom you may also know, she always argues with me that it's a privilege, that we don't often acknowledge how much of a privilege it is that we work in spaces that we love. And for a lot of people, that privilege certainly is not affordable. They're working to earn. And therefore, the argument over how many hours they should work is a completely different argument. And we're speaking as elite when we don't make that distinction.
I agree entirely, and I think you have to take that those into account: motivation, conditions, how hard it is, some of that work. I don't think there's one size for everyone, and that's why I think I have great respect for the L&T chairman, but fixating on the 90-hour issue and all the other sundry comments is just deflecting from more important debates we should be having.
So the more important debate we should be having is about the state of the world. We are entering a Trump presidency. We have seen from Donald Trump already some very, very strong statements about tariffs. No amount of his personal rapport with Prime Minister Modi is going to take away from his acting against India if he feels the need to. In any case, there's a kind of volatility in the air because you have these sort of free-range actors like Elon Musk who are now actually commenting on geopolitics. What's going on? How concerned are you? You're in the United States of America. Are you able to make any sort of comfortable forecast that a lot of this is noise, it will settle down once the inauguration is over, or is the world entering an extended period of uncertainty?
Well, I think almost surely the answer is the latter. It is a period of uncertainty, partly because nobody, maybe not even President-elect Trump, knows what's going on in his mind. For example, the issue of tariffs, his Treasury Secretary to-be has been talking about it being, more of a bargaining process, and that he'll settle down at something far less worrisome than what has been proposed across the board. There was some leaks that this would be very targeted only in certain industries and so on. And then President-elect Trump basically said, look, no, this is all fake news. There's been no change. So it's unclear. I mean, as far as tariffs go, one of the biggest worries is that he actually believes that tariffs will bring jobs back to the US and bring good jobs. But as our conversation earlier went, first, a typical move a company would have is to try and move the jobs to another emerging market if it can't sort of leave them in China. That's what they did with the first set of Trump tariffs. Now, if they prevent that by saying we're going to levy tariffs against India, against Mexico, if you sort of become the place for transshipments, we, for example, import solar cells from China, package them, and then send them as solar panels to the US. If that becomes targeted, then of course the belief is that those jobs will come back to the US, but the US has high cost labor. And so the only way it comes back is if there's more automation of the kind that we talked about. So there is going to be, in fact, a reduction in jobs in the world if, in fact, these tariffs are put up, because the industrial world has high cost labor. So what effect does this have? I mean, we've already seen one effect: a strong dollar, which is exactly the opposite direction the Trump administration wants the dollar to go, because they want the US to export to the world.
Yeah.
And of course, the beggar thy neighbor strategy. I'm going to put tariffs on you, but don't you dare put tariffs on me. Well, that doesn't last very long. At some point, the other countries are going to say, well, we can't see all our jobs leaving for the US. What we're going to do is put tariffs on their stuff. And then we get into a pretty awful world where everybody's trying to tariff each other. I do hope, one hope is that the new administration pays a lot of attention to the stock market. And the stock market has been sort of quite strong so far. And it may well be that some of these actions will create a reaction, which may cause them to back off a little bit. We'll see. But I think till we understand how this plays out. So tariffs is one. Immigration is another, right? We had the debate about H-1Bs that you have been following, but also a lot of industries like construction, retail, restaurants depend on immigrants who are undocumented. Mm-hmm. And a pretty strong attempt to deport and so on, of the kind that has been promised. Now, nobody thinks it'll happen of the kind that has been promised. But if it does happen, it could have a significant effect on labor supply in this country. And that, too, could have significant negative effects for firms in the stock market, as also for inflation, with the Fed already sitting put and waiting to see what happens. And so high interest rates may stay. So given all this, I don't think we can easily say this is not going to happen. That's what business people are saying in an attempt to justify where we are in terms of stock prices and all that. But I think nobody knows. And we really have to see how this plays out. Your only hope is that the pragmatic side of President-elect Trump sort of overcomes all the other aspects that have been promised.
Could we talk about the H-1B visas for just a moment, a little further, to also explore a kind of racism that seems to have erupted from one section, at least, of the Trump base. And Donald Trump's base is divided on the issue of H-1B visas. We know that Indian technology companies take about 20% or took 20% of these visas in the last year. My question to you is, do you feel any change, or do you feel the sort of response that we saw to Sri Ramakrishna's appointment as the AI advisor to the White House that really opened the floodgates of this racism, at least on social media, that this is more rhetorical, it's more online than real? Do you feel any different? I mean, I know you're an Indian citizen or still an Indian passport holder, but do you feel any changes?
Not in the workplace. I mean, I work at a university, and not in terms of opportunities, etc., from firms. Those are all fine. I think what you're seeing is a base. That is, where the at least some aspect of the latent racism in every country, it's not just the US, is coming to the fore. and is being given more room. And I want to emphasize this is in every country. There is a certain dialogue which brings out the worst aspects of us. It happens in India also when we talk about minorities. It happens in the US when we talk about races. And what you're seeing is that kind of free for all, untrammeled. The belief that the United States belongs to the whites, forget the fact that it was Native Americans who were here first. Somehow there's the sense that all the guys who came in the late 19th century, it's their country now, when in fact it's been a country of immigrants almost right through. And I think the sensible voices are basically saying we find the best wherever they are, and but you have to also be careful you don't add a kind of reverse racism to the dialogue. I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy talking about the culture of sort of the older the Americans who already not the new immigrants but the older immigrants. That's sort of fueling a fire which you don't really want to do. I think it's I think these cultural sort of battles where you say one culture is better than the other, best not the thing, because I don't think that's necessarily true, and it leads to a lot of stereotyping. So I think it's best to say every country benefits from getting the best talent it can, and every country should be trying to attract the best talent it can. We in India should be trying to attract some of the best people in the diaspora to help our scientific advances, our intellectual advances. But the America, I mean, to be supportive of what Elon Musk is saying. I mean, he says, I'm an H-1B guy. And I think that getting the best talent into the US is what it should be doing. I think the environment in every country is being poisoned by a kind of ethno-nationalism, which says there are some people on the in and the rest are out. And in an age where migration is going to become ever more important, to see these forces, I mean, it's understandable. This is the reaction to migration. But what you would hope is eventually we get policies which allow for the kind of migration that needs to take place, especially with factors like climate change, forcing that kind of migration.
Yeah, I want to end also by talking about something we haven't spoken about: ethno-nationalism, nativism. Yes, but what about a kind of tech bro culture? And I don't use this phrase lightly. You have Elon Musk virtually spearheading a kind of geopolitical conversation every day on X. You now have Mark Zuckerberg basically reversing each policy that Meta stood for over the last few years, in an obvious attempt to court favor with the Trump administration, now talking about how corporations need masculine energy. I have nothing against that per se. All kinds of energies should be incorporated in an inclusive work environment. But there is this sense that big technology is, these big tech companies are laws unto themselves. They're virtually sort of the Republic of X, the Republic of Facebook, and so on. And they are now very dangerously close to the seat of power, or will make sure that they are. And what sort of uncertainty can that pull the world into is just a final question that I'd like to leave you with.
Well, whenever any kind of corporation gets too powerful, and is close to government power, you have a huge fear about cronyism. They get the rules and regulations that help them and keep other kinds of competition out. That's one. But also you get the possibility that government is subverted to support their causes. There's a very nice piece the other day which talked about the fact that what are these tech companies afraid of? They're afraid of regulation. which is why they've gone to town against European regulation, which has been much more sort of intrusive than American regulation. And one of the things that might be happening right now is they hope to enlist the US government in their fight against European regulation, but not just European regulation, any country that wants to regulate them and say this kind of content is not reasonable. They want to have the cake and eat it too. Basically, run these large platforms, but not be responsible for anything that shows up on those platforms. Now, I'm not saying we need censorship, and I worry very much when the government controls it, because then pro-government stuff comes on and anti-government stuff gets taken out. But I do think that having a reasonable discussion about how you sort of manage content and what kind of content is allowable is very important. And tech bros don't necessarily have the last word on all this. It is a social and a governmental issue and should not be determined by them alone. But I worry very much in the US that all these in India, when we have the budget and you ask corporate honchos what they think about it, it's always 110% out of 100.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of pliancy that unfortunately is also now showing up in the US. And I've always been saying that you can talk all you want about institutions, but give enough time to a political authoritarian and every institution crumbles. And now people are saying, oh, we have to deal with 4 more years of Trump, so let's kowtow. The kinds of delegations that are going to Mar-a-Lago to bend the knee is actually very worrisome, because it suggests that they're preparing for 4 years of fealty. I do think the US cannot be complacent. I do believe the Trump administration should be given a chance, and there's been too much mud thrown at it without seeing what it is going to do. But at the same time, we have to be constantly worried about democracy staying strong, even in a country which has had 200 so many years to build its institutions. It's never done. The institutions can be undermined. It's certainly something that we should pay attention to in India. Elections, the judicial system. We need to constantly be reevaluating these to see if they do what they promise to do, and whether they strengthen democracy as they should. And unfortunately, across the world, democracy is being threatened.
And the irony, of course, is that elections may be imperfect, but they can sometimes throw up outcomes that, where the ideology is then so powerful, or so, or the politics or the political sort of numerical base is so strong that institutions are not able to weather that storm. But then our counter argument would be, there is no other way but elections to choose who represents the people.
I think that's right. What you need to do is make sure they're free and fair. That is, all sides who take part in an election start off with a level playing field, and the elections themselves are not manipulated in such a way as to favor one side or the other. So constant transparency on the process of elections, as well as transparency on the money power behind each party, I think is extremely important, because it is quite possible, given the kind of cronyism that you're seeing, that the weight gets shifted to those who have the money power, the incumbents who have the money power, as well as, if they can also control the election process, make it an unfair election. So I think in India, the lesson is constant vigilance, but also enormous transparency. I mean, the recent, election commission suppressing data, not putting out data, I think is extremely worrisome, because it's sort of saying we can't trust people to actually see the numbers. I think they should come out with the data as soon as they can, and it should be clean and allow people to make a judgment.
Just one last question on that, on the Indian Election Commission and the argument over, what's a fair election. Isn't there a distinction between the absence of a level playing field? Because politics is often Darwinian. We've had decades of, the Congress party having had the advantage, whether in terms of funds or influence, and now it's sort of the era of the BJP. And in both cases, the argument could be made that there's an absence of a level playing field. But that's not the same thing as a manipulated election. An election can be fair without it being facilitated by a level playing field.
Yeah, no. So let's separate the two, as you correctly point out. One is money power. Yeah. That's always been the case, and the question is, incumbents always enjoy more of it. And the issue is, does it become really to the point where it weighs the scale differently? And that's why constant transparency, what the Supreme Court did on election bonds, I think is really important. I see that as a win for democracy, what they said on the election bonds. There's a separate issue. The current conduct of the election itself has to be very, very clean and transparent. And, again, there are allegations being thrown around all over the place. I don't have any kind of expert opinion on those. But what I want to say as an academic is the best way to dispel that is to make the data public. And what I see is the data being sort of kept inside. The sooner it gets out, what were the electoral rolls in each? What was the booth-by-booth election outcomes? The better it will be for us to establish that the elections were, in fact, transparent and well conducted. And I think the last thing we want is, this is the Caesar's wife being above suspicion. Gender, let's adjust for gender. The point is, there are institutions that have to be completely transparent. And the best way is to show sunlight on all that they do, which means data that has to be put out quickly, without a long period when people lose interest and attention, but so that they can be analyzed and we get the answers very quickly. I think the last thing a country needs is the kind of Maduro Venezuela, where people have no faith in the elections themselves. And we've built up enormous faith in our elections, and I think we need to maintain it.
Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Cliches do have validity, and those are strong words from you. We are gearing up for an uncertain year, that's for sure. Thank you, Professor Rajan. Always a pleasure. Look forward to talking to you more often in 2025. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.